Kick us off, or?
I would like to brag on Councilmember Kiki Miller. From the bottom of the screen, you see a number of agencies that are representative, as is Chris Filios. But the thing that really has made this partnership work is the leadership of Councilmember Miller and my cohort, Community Development Director Hillary Anderson, or Planning Director as she is in Coeur d'Alene. The two of them have truly been A, the inspiration, B, the leadership to pull this group together and make things happen. And most everything you will see on the screen in a moment wouldn't exist if Kiki hadn't pushed for it. So I am grateful. It's good information. I think you'll find it useful.
Great. Thank you. That is appreciated and very humbling. It is a team of people. They've all stepped up. They've done this work, and I appreciate every time they answer my phone call. Honestly, every time. Every time. This is kind of a labor of love that I started 14 months ago because I heard all of these planners talking to each other about this housing issue and what we were doing in our community. And I think every one of us, if we've heard it once, we've heard it 1,000 times. Renters being displaced, nobody can hire. We have all these housing issues. We know it's national, and the labor shortage is part of that. So what we're trying to do is move the needle in our community in any way that we can, and multiple ways, in order to maintain the quality of life and the economic prosperousness that we have. So am I moving? There we go. Starting out a little bit light because the rest of some of this news isn't all that fun, but every one of us has looked at the memes and said, you know, what does our community look like? Where are we going? And we're kind of in this shock mode of what's happening with housing and what we can afford. I wanted to let you know that I'm saving time for questions, and we hope that you write them down. And really, if we're not covering something that we want to, I can guarantee you we've touched on it.
About how much time do we have?
Well, this is an hour, but.
Okay. We don't need that.
We don't need that. Okay.
I will tell you, I did this presentation about an hour ago, and I had 14 minutes to do it. So
yeah.
I went through the whole thing.
No, more than 14 minutes.
There you
Okay.
go.
Thank you.
What we're talking about here is the Regional Housing and Growth Issues Partnership, and just in the last couple of months, it's been 14 months for me from idea until we put the program together, but in the last couple of months, we do have a website. Most of the history of what we've done, all of the agendas, and the recordings of the advisory group are all there. So the public can see that at any time, and I'll leave you a card that has that, the website address on it. The working group consists of the regional planners, some elected representatives, and community, some select community members. That group meets once a month. We do this all via Zoom, and it's a roughly 16-member group. We kind of go through what the inner workings are of where we're at with our priorities and how things work, and what we need to address next. The next group, the next 2 weeks later, is the advisory group. Now, that's a group of representatives from about 40 different organizations throughout the county. Chambers of commerce, large industry, the hospital, the schools, anyone who's affected by this group of by this issue. All the rosters and the subcommittee members that we've built over the last year are on that website, so you can take a look at who's participating, and I will tell you that they're very involved. They do email me back. They have invited me to presentations. We are working interactively with those people all the time. This is the mission of the group. It has morphed over the last year, but this is what we are working towards now. I'll give you a little bit of brief history. When we first started this group, what we did is go through our advisory group and ask them, through all of the questions that they were getting, do a poll through their members. So what happens is the Chamber of Commerce sent it out to their membership and said, what in priority do you want us to work on? The thing that came back first, do you have a question?
Yeah, I read local workers. I mean, there are local workers and there are local workers. I mean, what slice?
We'll get to that.
There are some people that are never going to be able to afford a place here.
Practical.
And there are other people up here who can't afford a place. Have you set some income or
We're gonna give you real details on
Okay,
that. And we're
good.
also gonna give
Love
you
that question.
resources from where the details came
Okay.
from, so that we know that it's data-driven
Good.
information.
Good, good. Thank
So what
you.
happened is they asked us, and here's where you guys come in here again, came back and told us. The second thing was transportation and schools legislative action. Interesting, it fifth takes all of the others required, but that's what the people told us that they wanted us to do. So we spent the first almost 3.5 months dealing with that open space issue and listening to what the folks want. Under Wes Hansen, that open space. So I again applaud you for listening and taking action to do that. And I hear there's some great things that may come out of that. And it was just to be encouraging, kept me going, kept me motivated to say, wow, these people are stepping up and some things can really happen. So that number one priority was addressed. Transportation and schools, we have a school subcommittee and they are working on things together. All of the districts are involved. Under that subcommittee, 2 things are legislative, and one of the things they're talking about is how can the municipalities help these districts put together their own faculty or staff housing projects. That is not something that the entire group is working on. It's happening in that subcommittee, and the schools are working on that together, but it is being addressed. Number 3 is where we're at now, and that's providing local worker housing. I'm going to address your question really quickly because we'll get into a little more detail of it, but we aren't talking low-income housing. There's a number of organizations in our community that deal with that very low income. And what we're talking about is not workforce, because as we know, in the pandemic flipped the switch. Remote workers became a real strong influx of people who moved here. We're talking about people who have to live where they work, the local workers. And I think Sheriff Norris is here. It would be very difficult to run a department with remote officers. I don't think that that's going to work out well. And what we're trying to do is look at that 60% to 120% average median income working folks who can't live here, but they have to live where they work. And I think Maggie will address a little bit more of that later. Our partnership goals is we want data-supported solutions that we need. We don't want anecdotal conversations. We want a diverse group of the population. We want to educate folks. There's a drop-down list of FAQs on that website. Why can't we do a moratorium? What about this? What about that? We have gotten the factual answers and posted them there and refer back to that regularly and want our leadership to be able to do that. The progress, this is fast. The housing and affordability study is I think Maggie will touch on that. I've given you a little bit about what our subcommittees are doing. We've just started a subcommittee which is resident-owned communities. Counselor Thorson from Post Falls is leading that up. In a nutshell, what that does is it's an outreach program that goes to owners of mobile home parks and lets them know that if they decide to sell, they can go through an organization that will help turn their turn the tenants of the manufactured home park into shareholders in an HOA, which allows them to control their rents and stay in the property. So it's an education-based one, doesn't require any action, but we are moving it through as one of the options that we can preserve affordable housing. As Commissioner Felios walked in, I'll take a second. I'm glad you could join us.
Sorry about that. Yeah, me too. Go right ahead, Kiki.
These are the facts that are coming out of the affordability study. We knew that this was out there, but in 2016, at $250,000 home, 75% of the people who lived here could afford that. Where we're at right now is the average median price of the home is $500,000 and 76% can't afford it. I look at the MLS about every other day. 2 days ago, in Kootenai County, the number of homes that were priced at $500,000 and lower was 30. Of the 30 homes available, 17 were mobile homes on unowned land. That is not, so the meme I told you, that's not an anecdotal conversation. That's a fact of what's available and what we're trying to hire and move people in, and that's what's available for them. We've got this huge affordability gap. We know that what we're talking is our middle income buyers can afford and the current price of homes, and that is our infrastructure needs to reflect the income of real people. There isn't a way, and I mean maybe a magic wand, that the county could raise the level of wages for the people who need to live to work here to get to that $500,000 price point. So we've got to come up with some other solution. Here's where you're at. A family of 4 to a price the average home now, that's the hourly wage they'd have to have. I think that if we talk about, there's some other information that'll come out here, but we have some real crisis issues with families making decisions on where they want to live and what they can do to stay here. Meg, if you want to talk about the study
Can I
and
leave you
move forward
with the
with that.
mouse since you have the
You
feel?
can, yeah, it's touchy.
got the
You don't
touch.
want to make this mouse cranky, I'll tell you that.
So I'm here today in my role really as Executive Director for Panhandle Affordable Housing Alliance and also as a member of the working group for the regional effort that's going on that Kiki's leading. So what we've learned, right, generally is often solutions are developed without knowing the need. We all intuitively understand that housing's a problem here in Kootenai County, but what we felt, and Ginny sits on the board for Panhandle, I'll say PAHA as that acronym, sits on the board, and she's been faced with the same challenges just with economic development. So we said, let's get a really non-agenda driven, objective evaluation of Kootenai County so that we know where we are. That's what this is. So we hired the University of Idaho, and the Vista Foundation actually joined in with us to develop this availability and affordability study. We originally had hoped it would include in its scope Shoshone County, but the scope just grew so much that it wasn't practical in the time frame that we needed. It was completed in December of 2021, and the data that has come out of that, I think, has been incredibly valuable for us in terms of objectively evaluating what are our next steps. This was not a solutions-driven report. The solutions come now from knowing the data and where we are. It's fairly real time. They used the 2020 census data, and then they did a lot of stakeholder input surveys. And so we feel like we've got a pretty good reflection of Kootenai County today, which incorporates the COVID impact, which of course most data is 3 to 4 years old that's published. I did not realize this until this came out, but we are the fastest growing state. And Kootenai County ranks right up there with its growth. Next one. The challenges that we have are complicated, but there are solutions, okay? So PAHA's mission is dedicated certainly to our extremely low. I'll call those people our generational poor, right? And there is funding that comes for that group of neighbors. And I think, I've learned through PAHA that really that effort has to be federally funded. You cannot make those projects pencil. But PAHA's goal is also worker housing, affordability of homes for ownership. We know that we have solutions today that are viable, even in today's market, to address 60% to about 140% AMI, area median income. That puts the home price range in about $200,000 up to about $350,000, given the current interest rates for mortgages. So this is the goal here, and I'll just tell you this anecdotal story. I had a new stovetop installed. It was a father-son team. The son said to me, I am not going to be able to continue working with my dad because I can't find a home. I said, please be patient. We've got solutions on the horizon that are viable. We're just now launching the discussion of it, right? So, that's really what this slide is about, right? How do we provide housing, and we can, for our middle income, which honestly, by current standards, right, is really low income, tragically, because of the cost of housing, the cost of gas, the cost of food, the inflation that people are facing. They're really qualifying, and these are our situational poor. These are people who work. You've heard the term ALICE, asset limited income constrained, and they're in a situation that most of them have never experienced, where they have not been able to make ends meet. Yep.
I want to add one little thing on this one, which I think the data-driven information is that in the period of this survey, 54% of the home buyers are, 25% are second home buyers, and 15% are investors. So what we have is all of the inventory taking away from the local worker capability. And so when we're talking about these different categories, this middle income, that is a factual piece of information that says this is not going to change anytime soon unless we.
And that information came through the survey of the realtors. There wasn't really data available for the U of I team to analyze it, but I mean, that was just real-time input from the realtors.
And along those lines, at the real estate market forum, it was reported, and I think the figure was 13% of the homes are unoccupied.
Right.
Now, many are second homes.
That's right,
I
yep.
get it. If you own a home in Gaza or Black Rock, you might not want to rent it on a year-round basis, but it is compounding the problem.
It is, absolutely.
David, did they all get a copy of the UI study?
Is that the one that Lauren sent out?
Right, Lauren sent it out, but I don't know, Bill, did you, and Leslie, did you get a copy of it? I jotted it down to make sure.
It is,
Yeah,
And I can go to the website
It's on
too.
PAHA's website
Yeah.
too.
and it's linked
And
on
on this
the-
one, yeah.
yeah. And it's about 32 pages long, and it's well
Yeah.
worth the read.
Yeah, it is.
So, the housing study does a really good job explaining that as much as we'd like to slow growth, we really can't. It's happening. We can't control growth by limiting supply. What we do have control over is the supply and how we come up with those solutions. They included some market analysis of communities that have attempted to reduce the supply of housing, and you end up with the Sun Valleys, the Lake Tahoes of the world, right? And so it is contributing significantly to our shortage, the cumulative deficit that we had from the recession. That is it's not all just our growth. We were behind in number of units anyway. We are behind about 1 to 2 years in terms of our supply. The last 2 years, the building permits for housing units, this includes multifamily as well as single, was starting to produce, we were a little over 2,000 as a county in terms of permits issued. So the point is that we've got some catching up to do, in addition to finding solutions that are targeted specifically to building and preserving housing for our local workers. When we're talking about this, we know that growth is here, and if you don't like spending 5 minutes at the stoplight now at Kathleen and 95, probably you should move, because I don't think that's going to change. But what we do know is we can still preserve the integrity of Kootenai County. We really can, if we do it right. And if we're excited to share with you some of the solutions that we've discovered. There are communities across the country who are having the same problem. This housing price increase is not just unique, as you know, to us, right? And in fact, the housing study does a really good job talking about Spokane. It's not a tourist destination, but they have had very, very similar increases. They're at about 480 right now in average priced homes. So our goal is that we can preserve the integrity and the beauty of our neighborhoods and our community with these solutions.
And then we'll let Jenny jump in because this is her wheelhouse, and that's we know we have a labor shortage in just humans and unemployment issues
Right.
all over the nation, but
It's
Jenny sits
related to
in-
the housing.
That relates
So,
to housing.
We have about 2,700 unfilled jobs right now. We're not saying it's all home related, but we have that many jobs. A clear example of that, Kootenai Health is about 700 jobs short. Usually they have a 250, listing of vacant positions. That's for just general turnover. 650 to 700 right now. Okay, so this loss, by the way, equivalent, the 2,700 equals about 220 million in GRP loss for our region, about 159 million in lost wages. And we were pretty conservative when we calculated that lost wages. So what we're hearing in economic development is local companies, and I'm sure you've had it happen with the county as well, they'll get a job offer because they are able to find employees from outside of the area. They say, sure, I'll take the job, but give me a couple of weeks to look at houses. They go look for houses, they come back and they say, I can't take the job, okay? So it's definitely curtailing even our existing businesses from expanding, and for that matter, it's keeping them from being able to replace people that have moved on, retired, or wherever they are. So we can't even keep the existing businesses as operational as they are right now. So this is gonna get from bad to worse unless we all do something to find the solutions. And the good news is we do have some solutions that we're hearing about. We know that construction costs have gone up. We know the timeline has also gotten worse because of all the disrupted supply chains. I don't think that's gonna get fixed anytime soon, especially now that we've got Ukraine and Russia things happening. So I think as we were all recovering, we were thinking that that was all, but there's always new geopolitical things happening in the area. So land costs, by the way, in our area have also grown. It was $5,000 an acre about 5 years ago. They're now going for $20,000 to $30,000 an acre. Small property in Coeur d'Alene is about $100,000. And then, as we all know, mortgage rates are probably going to increase. We already heard the Fed's some talk about that one. So what's important is that we keep it affordable so that our children and our grandchildren can stay here. For that matter, some of our friends can stay here, right? We want to make sure we provide good quality of life, like Maggie said, and that we keep a thriving economy. And like I said, we can't keep a thriving economy if we can't even keep our existing businesses sustainable and operational, and our public agencies, for that matter. And we need to start now, okay? We don't have time to waste. As you saw from the slide, we're already in a deficit, and we're going to continue to increase that deficit. We do need to work together in order to change the trajectory. And of course, the Regional Housing Group is working on some solutions, and I'm going to hand it back to Maggie to discuss some of them.
So, land costs are probably the most significant component, right, of where we are in terms of the housing pricing. And there are a lot of really good options to strategically increase what we've got for affordable housing by addressing the land component. There are basically what I call three buckets, or what the three of us are calling three different categories for these land. For addressing the land, we can have, and we believe that by having the entire community own this and participate in providing these solutions, this will be the quickest way for us to build up the inventory and make units available. So we have private land ownership, right? That falls into basically two categories. We've got developers and builders, and then we've got employers. There are employers here who own land, and they are interested in trying to develop housing for their employees. Then we also have this, what I think is a private, more public perspective, and that is community land trust. A community land trust is very flexible on how it's defined, but it is the one, it has to be held by a nonprofit. The land is owned and leased back to the homeowner, but it is the one model where affordability in perpetuity can be maintained by limiting the accretion or the increase in value to a certain, it's usually tied to inflation, so that windfall profits for a market that increases substantially are not all gained by the individual. So it keeps it in perpetuity. And so that's one of the things that we're really excited about in terms of land trusts. We can, and Kiki can speak to this, incorporating policies. Why don't you talk a little bit about Coeur d'Alene on the policies, or you want me to?
I will when we
Okay.
get, let's go
Okay.
through some of these other creative ideas,
Let's do.
things that you have done, and then
Okay.
we'll move into that when we get to the drop down.
Okay, so what we did, we did secure a project for the extremely low through HUD funding and IHFA last year. And the way that we went to the landowner there, so on the private landowner side, we said to them, gosh, we can't pay you market. We're a nonprofit. Can we pay you cost? and then you can take a donation for the delta between market and cost. And that's a tax donation, and that worked for that landowner. So that's how we were able to make it pencil. So that's that example. Really excited about the modeling that's being done just across the border in Bonner County in a project called Culver's Crossing. That is a private landowner who I went to school with her in Sandpoint. She's passionate about the integrity of the Sandpoint community. So she owns this property, and as a landowner, she has put in deed restrictions. So instead of selling her land to a developer, she has worked money. I mean, the whole point on this is it has to be sustainable. And what she has written in is you have to have lived in Bonner County for 2 years. And if you're disabled, a senior, or you have to be actually working in Bonner County. So that's how we protect the homes from investors and retirees coming in and swooping up the inventory. This is a fabulous example. And really, honestly, our battle cry is if they can do it in Bonner County, we can do it here. And we think that there are some great ways. I mean, we've learned from what they've done up there, right? The way that they've made it really mutually beneficial for the municipalities to participate in this. This is a PUD. And it's beautiful, right? It's got green space. It looks like it's just going to be a fabulous development.
And Maggie, the thing that intrigues me about this is the housing price is set by what the new owner can afford, not market driven.
That's right.
And that's huge.
Oh, yeah.
I do think, it's so true, David, right? They're like reverse engineering it. So as they pre-sell the homes, and I'm just going to give you one example of this one, why it's so exciting, but then they figure out what to build. I honestly think our demand is so great here that we could just build in a 50 unit, just build X number of 200, X number of 250, and they'll all sell. Right, because I think so. I'm not sure,
Yeah.
but it is. I mean, they've got the ability to reverse engineer that for what they can
Maggie, what are
afford.
the lot sizes here?
They're mixed, and so let me give you an example of what they're doing. So one unit that the builder explained to me, it looks like a beautiful home from the outside, but single roof, single foundation, 3 condos in the middle. Right, they're about 1,000 square feet. Prices, they can build those for about $225,000. Isn't that fabulous? Right? And then they're doing duplexes, they're doing triplexes, and they are doing some single family. So the density, he said, honestly, our density will be about the same as if we had kept it single family detached. But we're clear doing up there with this
So when you
project.
say they're duplexes or triplexes, so the individual is owning their unit?
This is all home ownership.
Condo.
And honestly, if you look at it, what we're seeing through PAHA especially, and through the work that we're doing through Charity Reimagined, and these two women as well are, and you guys are, but if home ownership, if we can get people into home ownership, it is their trajectory for success. And we can get 60% AMI people in a home, right? If we can get it about 200,000. And what they didn't experience, like so many of our people displaced with no homes because their rentals sold in this market. And so our goal is really focused on ownership. And this is a fabulous example for us.
And I'm going to dovetail because
Yeah.
it's what I do. I jump in on everybody's. But I just wanted to tell you in that I have sat across the table from no fewer than a dozen developers
Right.
and talked in specifics about some of these programs. And I see the light bulbs coming on.
Yes.
They understand this is their livelihood, this is their community, this is what they need to do. And when they see a way to say, I can work from my margin, something done, when we look at things like multi-generational housing codes, and I think you may have heard of those, but that's some of the things where you have a resident home with 3 units in it. You're not destroying a neighborhood or the aesthetics, but you're providing that inventory. They're starting to see that deed restrictions are a word that isn't
Yeah.
ugly. We can make that happen. They're starting to see that limited equity co-op idea makes sense. These are some things I'll talk about a little bit more, but I wanted to let you know that there's even amongst the competitiveness of the development and building community, they're listening and they understand that they have to be part of this solution. So
Can I add to that too? And what they're also understanding is that we need to provide the homes for the local workforce. So they are talking about deed restrictions so that, let's say only a small percentage can go to investors. And they're even talking about prioritizing public agency workforce, health workers, public safety and health. I can't remember all the different categories that we've talked to them about as within that income that we really need to preserve. And like Kiki said, what's really encouraging is to hear the developers, once they've read that report, they go, this is critical and we need to be a part of the solution.
So you're really driving this from the affordability standpoint
Absolutely.
Yes.
And availability.
and availability.
They go hand in hand, whether
Right.
you can afford it or not, it has to be available. And that's for that AMI that's gotten up so high. We have, dental hygienists and a nurse that go, well, we make really good money, but
Right.
Our educators.
we're
right?
moving. so.
Educators, right.
Our law
Yeah.
enforcement, right?
Yeah.
Our public
So they're
safety.
definitely seeing the need to do it, and they are talking about different things that they can do to help with the issue. We told them that we understand they still need to make money, because what's the point of being in business if they aren't gonna make any money at all? But anyway, okay, we'll keep going. We get sidetracked on the good stuff.
You want me to go through it? You go.
When you can.
Okay. So these are some things that we're looking at, and I will tell you that we will be in front of all, we have appointments to be in front of all of the planning and zoning commissions and the city councils throughout the county. And one or the other of us will be there to share this information. This is evolving, so some things that they may, that you hear, we may have vetted out a new solution, and they may hear something a little different, but we're trying to publicly record and make all of these things available. Some things that we're talking about, the short-term rental code, I point to that one because Coeur d'Alene and Sandpoint are the only ones that have those. The rest of the cities and the counties here don't. And that market changed dramatically during the pandemic. That whole get out of your town and go do a verbo somewhere became a heightened phenomenon. Our code was built 3 years ago with a very light hand. And what we have discovered is that it is backfiring somewhat. It's taking away from the long-term rental inventory in a dramatic way. It's becoming a cash cow for out-of-state investors. And there's been a lot, there's just data out there that proves that the city of Coeur d'Alene had 232 vacation rental permits, and we had a company who wanted the city's business to manage that piece of work for the city of Coeur d'Alene. So they did an independent study and found there were 640 vacation rentals being advertised. So what's happening is that piece of the market, and I love entrepreneurs, I love that they've figured out a way to make that money, but that code needs to be revised in order to protect our neighborhoods and help the local worker housing inventory exist. So these are things that policy changes that we're going to continue to develop as suggestions. Different PUD co-ops is one of the things we have talked about. I am sure you've heard of the Habitat for Humanity model, where what they do is the limited equity co-op sweat equity to get into it. They're pre-qualified buyers. Habitat retains the land. Those owners are able to live there at a lower monthly cost, but when they sell, they only retain 3 to 5% of the equity over the price of that property that they put into it, and that property is then resold to another qualified buyer.
That's the
During-
land trust.
The
That's
land trust model.
I lived in a cooperative at the University of Illinois, and the income requirements to be there were rather modest. But you bought from the co-op, and when you moved, you sold to the co-op. And in the interim, you were able to use the amount you would pay that would be your quote mortgage to write off on your taxes. And that's what allowed us to put away money enough for a down payment on an actual home.
Exactly.
And that's a
Right.
starter option.
Yeah.
Is that still, that kind of program still in effect?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a
model.
lot of flexibility.
Right.
Works
Right.
great.
And
Structured
that's
in a
why,
number of ways.
but those are things that we haven't had in the nomenclature in this community. So these are words that we are trying to introduce and make people understand through FAQs of how that works and what's going to happen there. One of the things we're talking about, and I think even our planners had conversations, because I heard a developer say, nobody's ever asked me, what are you doing for local worker housing when you're bringing this plan to design review? And I was on my heels, what am I supposed to say? And I said, well, what are you doing? How are you going to do something within your request to develop that's going to do this? So these are, there's another, the first right of refusal program is one that's been done in other communities, and that was by ordinance. And what they do is say, if you have, I'm gonna say an apartment building, and you wanna sell that apartment building, and our city has set a minimal multi-unit level at 12, and yours is over 12, then you need to go to a qualified agency, say PAHA, and say, I wanna offer, I'm gonna sell, here's my appraisal. PAHA has the first right to buy it at fair market value. That puts more properties into a land trust. So those are things that, and of course, my presentation is very simplified, but that's the general gist of how a first right of refusal could work. So those are some policy changes. We're looking at things that aren't popular, words like infill, pocket housing, density, but some things that are appropriate and help with this local worker housing need to be considered.
And they're beautiful neighborhoods, right? I mean, there's this perception that we're trying to educate about.
Yeah.
That the smaller housing is beautiful and meets wonderful needs and develops great neighborhoods, right?
And there is data out there, even through the National Home Builders Association, that says that there's a level of buyer that don't want the big yards. They don't want the two-car garages. They have a different mindset. And so they want the starter home that we had back in the 50s and 60s that was the small unit that they just had low maintenance and low cost to get into. So we need to take a look at that.
The ULI housing yesterday and the day before, they were talking about the different types of housing, the creativity and the different types of housing that are available now, whether they're tiny homes, cluster homes, the walk-ups, or whatever different things they have. It's like Kiki said, not everybody really wants that big yard, so it gives everybody different entry points towards home ownership.
Mm-hmm. So we have 2 more slides, and then I want to have you have an opportunity to ask some questions, and I want to throw out some other creative solution ideas. I had talked to Sheriff Norris in passing and said, I hope you come and listen to this, because I feel that I'm in your chair for the city of Coeur d'Alene, and we know that we have open firefighter positions, open police officer positions, even IT positions that they've received 0 applications for. And as I say that, I know that we cannot raise the wage level in order to match that housing issue.
Threshold.
So we're looking at other creative solutions. One of the things I have talked to, I'm going to get through a couple of these, go through the solutions toolkit and then questions, but I have talked to a number of folks about voluntary funding mechanisms. And one of the things that I want to do is see if we can have our real estate community, anyone involved in the real estate community, champion a voluntary contribution to any of their clients and constituents through a foundation that's been in existence for 16-ish years. It runs through Idaho IHFA. It's called the Housing Partnership Foundation. And what it is it's stable, has the financial oversight and the ability to put money back into the county from where it came, with matching funds from different areas even, and we can build up a fund, community land trust properties that we've talked about. So having the folks that, and I know, Chris, you deal with this a lot, but the developers and the realtors they're demonized as being the ones who caused the problem. Well, it's a realtor's job to sell the house for what the property owner said. End of story. That's their job. But this is a way for them to say, hey, you just purchased this house in this beautiful place that you discovered. How about this percentage of a contribution to this fund so that the people who serve your state can afford to live here too? I mean, that is whatever that looks at is up for a voluntary funding mechanism. So we have another subcommittee. I told you about the mobile home park, transferring those. This is part of the creative solutions. We have employer-funded worker housing. We can work with things as jurisdictions to help those employers reduce the cost on what they need to do if they're building faculty and employer housing on their land. So these are things that have worked in other areas. This is on the website, and what we're building is in chapters is a solutions toolkit. What we hope to be able to do is there's a summary under each one of these that you clicked on right now that kind of says what that is. As we vet these out further, we'll create kind of a template so our decision-making folks, our zoning people, and our citizens can look at that and say, well, what does that really mean? What does that limited equity co-op really mean? And they'll have a definition source to go to. I will tell you one thing that is an off-the-shelf program that we are looking at, and as the folks I've been talking to in the last few days, is this home sharing program. It is a way that you take a national template. I look at it sort of like a franchise. We take it and plug it in under a nonprofit, and basically what it does is say, here's how you connect with law enforcement, you connect with people in your community, you connect with the elderly, the empty nesters, and the people who need a home. Then, for example, you have a daylight basement with a family room, a bedroom, a kitchenette, and a bathroom. You get connected with somebody who would maybe shovel your driveway, take your trash out in exchange for a much lower rent, and now you have one structure that's got two different families living in it that have a mediator to make sure that that program works. That's a national, very successful program that's been done, and we can plug it in locally with the right funding and the right support to get it here. And that is not creating any new inventory. It's taking people who already live here or need to live here and putting in structures without any change to that structure. So that's some of the things when I said there's things we can do today, that's one of them, and we're working on that.
So out of this, really, just, there are lots of solutions. There's not a single solution, right? And if we approach it on multiple levels, right, and get the participation of the entire community, we're pretty confident that we can get the inventory built up.
And I will tell you that I have been in the ARPA dollar conversation
Yep.
At the city level, the county level, state level, where it's coming from.
Yep.
What I know to be true is that if we have the ability to build a war chest, and I believe we need $10 million to start. Where we get that will be from multiple different sources, ARPA funding from jurisdictions, the voluntary contributions. We have grants we can get involved with to try to put that war chest together and then go to buy down the land to say, if you, and this is hypothetical, I'm going to throw it out there like this and you guys can like try that on. If the county says, well, we'll give you $5 million of our ARPA money. We put it into a war chest, we buy down some property in Coeur d'Alene, and then what we do in exchange for that is say, you get, of the 12 properties we're building, 5 of them dedicated to your public safety officers throughout the county or your county employees that need housing and you need to fill those jobs. That keeps you from saying we're in a position of having to raise taxes to try to get those wages. You don't have the issue of your sheriff saying, I got to hire these people at this much more than I hired you because you bought your house at $250 and they have to buy theirs at $500. We have the ability to do some exchange like that to say these people can get into these homes. They get first right to start. That happening is now because we know that we have a deficit in some of these employment areas. So I'll close with, get involved with it. There's stop the spread of misinformation. Like somebody anywhere ever could do that, but we got to try to do that. And then stay involved in those. So that's the end of our presentation, unless you had anything to add that I missed. And I'd love to take questions, and we're ready.
Well,
What kind of misinformation are you encountering?
Well,
Not to put too
That-
fine of a point on it, but
that would take a long list. I will tell you just, this one happens at a lot of my presentations. Why can't you tax the tourists to pay for the housing for the people who need to live here? Well, we know the answer to that, but there's a lot of folks out there who don't know the answer to that, and then they believe it's a decision that our electeds made. So that's misinformation that we're trying to counter and say, we can't do that. We are not a designated tourist entity, and so we can't levy a tax.
how about the nice generalized one? This is another example of government overreach.
This? Yeah, I've heard that, but that's the important thing about this is that there's government partners because they're the ones who can make decisions. This is predominantly led by the advisory group, where they're going, the people of the community and the market. It's not led by the government, and that's not the intent that we government our way out of this at all.
And I would just add to that, our major solutions are privately driven.
Right,
Passionate about that,
I think that's real important.
right?
yeah.
That's the way it's sustainable, and that's how we're going to get volume,
Very
right?
good.
Now, there is a very important role for private and public together
Correct.
as an additional part of this complex challenge. But predominantly, we want it privately driven. Yeah.
And there's also a role from the government in terms of some of the regulations, okay? You allow cluster housing being built where it's normal single family, so you're actually, like the example at the Culver's Crossing, you're retaining the density, you're just changing the layout, okay? So there's the part of the government that can allow those, but it's, and we were talking about it the other day, some of them are probably per project, okay? There are some PUDs, let's say, that are going to come up for approval. And normally it's like you said, a house per 10 acre, okay? But maybe we start allowing a little bit more gentle density so that people that are working for our public agencies, for our hospitals and for our schools are able to buy homes. We've talked about it before, it's not sustainable to have a house per 20 acres because that doesn't really retain the open space, that only gives the open space for that one owner versus all of us. So everybody has a role, but we were talking about public, and then private, and then like Maggie said, private is what's really gonna drive this.
I have
That
another
needs help.
question. What's the realistic event horizon for this to begin impacting people like Sheriff Norris and David? David's had a few people bow out because of, this is a very common thing throughout the county. So what are we looking at? A year, 2 years, 7 years?
I can answer two different
Yeah.
ways and let you guys.
Okay.
And the one thing is, the home share program could be done within 90 days. Within 90 days.
There's a model for it.
There's
Yeah.
a lot for it.
Just
I
plug
like
and play.
We just apply
So-
it
Right.
to our area.
So
Yeah.
it's from 90 days to developers who haven't broken ground yet saying,
Right.
we're willing to play, we're willing to do that. And when we get the community comfortable with terms like deed restrictions,
Right.
and that's not a bad thing, and that the county and the community and the cities, they get something for it without
That's
doing
right.
anything.
Right.
They don't have to govern anything, they don't have to demand or mandate anything. What they have to do is support education for that developer to see how that will benefit them in the long run. And then occupancy restrict properties at a percentage. So they have some incentives to do that. So 90 days to 5 years.
Right.
And we know that what we're talking about and what I'm doing, this is foundational. This is a 2-year
Right.
commitment on my part. But this is something that needs to be sustainable as an organization and as a resource for this community, because this growth issue isn't going to be solved. It's going to be, the dial's going to be moved. Some solutions are there. We are going to be able to house local workers, and the impact will be felt in commensurate to the amount of energy we put into it. So 90 days, 2 to 5 years for actual
Some
large
might be-
volume.
Some might be a year on some of the PUDs, because I think some have been already in discussions with the cities, maybe even, I don't know about the county, but I know that the projects in my head, they've been in discussions with the cities. I don't know if they've submitted their plans yet, but these are the companies that we've all talked to that have said, we're willing to do those. Like, it sounds like bad words, when you say deed restrictions, but it's really going to be to our benefit, because they're putting them in so that we can house our educators, our public safety officers, our nurses, our medical assistants, and so forth and so on.
And the deed restrictions are placed by the private property owner.
Correct, we're not doing
Right,
it,
just
they're doing it by choice, because they know that if they don't put it in place, chances are, because of what's happening in our area, investors will come in swoop up, let's say, all the ones that are around 300 to 350, and then we've lost that. They're building it at that price range because that's what we're saying we need, okay? But they also know that if they don't put those deed restrictions, investors are gonna come in, buy them up, put them into verbos again, and we've lost that capacity to house our workforce.
If we can get our municipalities to understand density.
Yeah.
And that density needs to be changed up, right? Because that's the
Right.
key here. It will happen quicker. And that's why we're talking to all of the councils and planning
Right.
and zonings about the potential. We're working with one developer right now who's going back to Rathdrum with a totally new plan that I think provides Rathdrum with some great incentives to change the zoning
Yeah,
and the
that's what I
density.
was
So
gonna
we'll
ask you
see.
about, because this gets into the politics.
It does.
And clearly, if we look at the results of the most recent elections in November, basically it's limited to anti-growth. And clearly, if you're talking higher density, potential collision, how do you handle it?
We're making progress on that.
So,
Chris,
so
actually,
that's one of the
yeah.
misinformation, right?
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
one of the things that people say is, we just stop growth and we just stop, approving these plants. Well, you can't do that
That has
according to our
ramifications.
Idaho codes, right? If they fit within the parameters, you pretty much have to
Right.
approve it,
Right.
okay?
And
So,
Yeah.
so the point I guess we're trying to make is that it's not even just a new growth. Remember when I said our local businesses, you lost workers because they can't afford it. Our hospital is short 700 people,
Right.
but 450 more than normal.
But I think continuing to focus on the local worker aspect and protecting private property rights, those things can coexist. And I think that is where the messaging needs to be when these things come apart, because we're not doing this to attract outside people. We're doing this for the local worker. And so I think that's where the messaging needs to really hammer down. This
Yeah.
is,
And to that point, Leslie, I mean, so when we listen, when I say we like to go on a listening tour,
Right.
and we're listening to these new council members. Their concerns are legitimate.
Yes.
Just what you just said, right? And what you guys have already said. But they're solutions oriented. And we've got the solutions that address it, keeping people from just swooping in and constantly displacing our local
Right.
workers because they've got the cash that they've just liquidated, right?
right.
By these private landowner deed restrictions, for instance, like what's up in Sandpoint. So, because those are legitimate concerns. I mean, you can just keep building the inventory, but if people just keep coming in from the outside,
It doesn't do
Right.
any
it doesn't do
good.
any good.
I've
So
got a
we
couple
understand their
questions for
concerns.
David. The report that you guys did, that your planners put together, I forget the title, the 18-page
The
paper,
the white paper.
the white paper that really fits in well with what's being discussed today. Have you seen what they?
Yes.
Oh, okay,
Everybody
good.
working together.
Second
Yes.
question is, how does this play into the county? By that I mean the unincorporated areas.
We can revise our zoning to make it more flexible,
Okay.
especially to do some of the, what Kiki mentioned, the first floor, second floor, or basement sort of thing. We could revise, we'd need to start with our comp plan and actually change some broad, long-range planning policies to then do local code changes. But we could also, I think just being a party to this, it helps the politics of the community understand that this is a we effort, and there is a tipping point to these things, where if the kinds of things these three just mentioned start to happen incrementally, you will feel a shift in the community. You will feel and see that people are less concerned about overreaching government because they are seeing actual benefits to the local community. And I think the county is uniquely qualified to be in the forefront of leading that effort.
And perhaps just by what we had talked about with the different developers we're talking to, when they come for approval of a new project and they're asked to say, are you occupancy restricting properties to local workers, and how many? And if you're asking for a density increase and you're not doing that, I think that our planning and zoning folks have perfect right to deny that.
Right.
They're not helping our situation. So, that's something in a findings that would have to be, vetted out. But those are the things that we need to make win-wins for these decision makers. It is political, and it'll continue to be that way until they get this message that this isn't another government layer. What it is a resource group that contains all of us involved. And I will tell you, if you look at that roster, some of the largest naysayers or whatever you want to call, they're involved in this group. I've invited everyone in this group. We all live here. And we all need public safety regardless of where we live. And we all need
need
good medical care.
educators.
And we need
healthcare.
those local
And
workers.
the thing too that strikes me is, especially as I read this report, which by the way I thought was outstanding,
Thank you.
is, and it raised the tough question, immigration. If this country doesn't deal with it, we got a problem. We have 11 million open jobs, declining birth rate. How are you gonna fill those jobs?
There's a different study that Commissioner Filius is talking about that economic modeling just put out. Did everybody get a copy of that?
The MZ report?
MZ, it's the
Oh,
answer to
that's
the
the one
demographic drought.
earlier,
They
okay.
did a demographic drought that I know we sent to everybody.
Mhm.
They did a solutions, kind of like us. We did the statistics first, and then we're coming up with the solutions. So economic modeling did the demographic drought to show where the shortages are and why we have a shortage.
Okay.
And they have an accompanying study to that, and I will be happy to send it to you if you'll just
And I've got
read
a
it.
copy too, I can just.
Oh, yeah,
I
please.
didn't know if you wanted, okay.
Yeah, that can go out to everybody and
It's
anybody.
eye-opening.
Put that
Yeah.
on the
It's
site.
eye-opening,
We need
yeah.
to link that to the site.
Yeah, we can, yeah. But all of it is tied together, and I think that's part of the point we're trying to make is we're talking to developers and builders because we know that as developers, they control big giant numbers of these homes. So if we can show to them how critical it is that, okay, if we don't find housing for our local workforce, they won't have any contractors to work with.
Yep.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so I think that's part of the reason that they really see the value in their own self-imposed deed restrictions on their development, because they go, and I go, we can't function as a community if we don't have educators, if we don't have healthcare workers, if we don't have public safety people, if our cities and counties don't have full.
And if we
get
don't have
behind
construction workers.
on building permits, then everybody gets excited, right?
I did have a developer ask me, can I occupancy restrict some of my development to my own labor force? I said, absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't know
Isn't
how you would swing a hammer remotely, but
Right.
I mean, that may be technology, but it's not available now.
So what would happen, and this is just really in the weeds, I think, but if somebody is a local worker, they purchase one of these homes, then they get a great job to work remotely. So now you've just kind of lost that person for the local job. And I mean, are they just going to get to remain there? Because you can't just tell them they have to
Some of the
leave.
deed restrictions some of the companies are talking about, and even the CCNRs, is it limits the number of, let's say it was your worker, you worked, and now you're ready to sell, okay? But it limits the number of, let's say, short-term rentals within the entire PUD. So you'd have to talk to the homeowners association to see if this investor can buy it and verbo it, or whether it has to go to, I think those are some of the things that they're discussing.
I think, Leslie, your question though was too if you change jobs and become
Yes.
remote.
Are you
If-
gonna get kicked
yeah.
out of
We
your
just-
home?
we-
Is
Yeah.
kinda what you're saying,
Yeah,
right?
we've PAHA
Uh-huh.
has hired an attorney to help us on these nuances. And
Okay.
I don't know, I think you're talking to council as well.
Right.
So
Oh,
those
sorry.
are some,
Yeah.
that is a bit in the weeds, right?
You
So
could work into the deed restrictions the income level.
That's true.
Right.
If they've
Yes.
gotten, a bump like this, then they no longer qualify.
And I will tell you that there are multiple programs that have been done on a federal and a state level for years. I'll give you one example called farm home loans. Maybe you remember those from way back.
Yep, yep.
It was the same thing. You buy into it knowing the consequences. You get a low down payment, you get a
Right.
subsidized monthly mortgage, you know you have a payback when you sell your property. This would be the same thing. If it's an occupancy restricted property and you buy in at this great deal, you own it. But if you change your job, that was part of the agreement, that you worked in Kootenai
Right.
County. You have the option to take that remote job. Yes, it's gonna be a stress if the boss says, well, we've decided we're changing to remote. It's not
Yeah.
your fault.
Right.
Those cases are going to happen, but those cases are happening now. When
Right.
people are saying, I'm gonna quit my and fall into lower income category and get Section 8 vouchers.
Yeah.
So those decisions are happening with families now. What that does is allow that person to say, no, I'm gonna find another job in Kootenai County, which helps us, because I wanna stay in my house, I wanna stay in my school district.
Right.
So the flip side of that is, are they gonna get kicked out of their home? They're probably gonna be asked to correct that situation with win, in my view.
Okay.
And there's still details, like
Yeah.
what Maggie said.
Well, like I said, I think it was a pretty weedy question, but I
No,
just,
but it's,
This is something that
those
came
are
up.
legitimate, yeah, I
It's
mean,
important.
those
It's
are,
important.
It's relevant.
it is
Very
relevant.
relevant.
And it's
Yeah.
been asked at almost every one of
Yes.
my presentations,
Yes.
so you're spot on.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I think much of the concepts you're dealing with at this point probably look more appropriate for the urban areas, a little bit less so for rural, but then I think David has an approach to that too. The thing is, when we get into the unincorporated areas, the first argument you're gonna hear is we wanna preserve the rural character.
Right.
Okay, which by the way, is also in our comp plan. And so that's the delicate
Hence the open
balance.
space.
Well-
And one solution is multi-generational. You say,
Yeah.
okay, well, here's one that looks like a farmhouse, but there's two families living in there, grandma and grandpa and the kids, and it's probably happening now anyway.
Right.
But if you make that, a sustainable housing model, it doesn't change the character of the neighborhood. It keeps it rural, but it does put, two families or three families in.
That was one of the comments made at the ULI housing the last 2 days, because they said, we have to keep in mind that the rest of the world does multi-generational housing. The US does not, one of the countries that does not, but it may be that we're heading in that direction because, like we said, this is a nationwide thing, that we're having these home prices going up. And it may just be one of our solutions. It's just one of the things that they mentioned, that
Sure.
it's not, there's a lot of new lingo that we're discussing that's not the norm here, but maybe it becomes more of a norm across the nation because of the housing prices that are happening.
my in-laws lived with us for 10 years, and we're about to finish our addition to bring back my husband's elderly uncle and his mom. So we've just lived like that, and
Yeah.
I think that that's just a healthier
It is.
way to live. So,
is.
The
I mean,
Philippines lives that way.
Yeah.
It keeps families together.
Yeah,
A lot of societies.
a lot of,
Typically is one set of utility hookups, one
Yeah.
mailing address, one front door, but multiple families in that structure. So whether you have a family with 7 children or 3 families with no children, you have the same amount of humans in the structure.
right. Well, and my mom lives in one with my sister in Henderson. They made a whole entire neighborhood of
Oh, lovely.
single-family homes with a casita right next door. So
cool.
she has her own garage, her own front door. They share the backyard, and then there's a doorway in between. Yeah, and I mean, they've been there several years, and I mean, they built on purpose to get her there.
Yet
So,
those are the kinds of things that we need
Yeah.
to,
Mhm.
those
Yeah.
are the kinds of things that we need to look at
yeah,
and allow
And the
to
example
happen.
that Leslie gave, that's considered a single family. So
Yeah,
now you don't get into, excuse me, the multifamily type
right,
conflicts.
yeah.
And you can modify ADU codes and things like
Right.
that with those kinds of things. These are all things in the tool and this to say, here's what's possible. So we have those options available to decision makers.
And I think it's just a matter of all of us keeping an open mind about the different creative solutions and really looking at them. Some of them may not work here, and we say, okay, we looked at it, it didn't work here, but
right.
there are some good solutions across the nation that are best practices that we can certainly look at. Maybe we change it up a little bit to make it apply here better. But I think there are, and I know that we were all encouraged that we were hearing a lot of the developers talking about setting up their own deed restrictions so that it will allow workforce to buy the homes that they intended to go for the workforce. They're not
Actually, very
losing any money,
positive.
they're still selling them at the same price. They're just designating it for a certain set of workforce versus allowing any investor to just come in and pick up all 10 townhomes,
And that's what we're trying to do, and I circle back to, you know, you can do anything with money, but we are trying to build this war chest to say, we need the legal counsel, we need the setup administration, so that we can get this education piece out there and say, here's the template of how you, in the county, wherever it is, your planning and zoning people and your planners have vetted out information that's structurally possible to do to move some of these things forward. So we need the land too, but all these things are being done simultaneously. So that's the fastest we can go in every area to try to move the dial.
I'm gonna mention this one developer that I'm talking to, I'm gonna mention that multi-generational thing
I
that you
know.
just said, right?
Yeah, no,
Because
that's
it's
a
really
winner.
a cool idea, because
That's just
they're
a
already
winner.
setting up all sorts of different types of homes
Yeah.
in this particular PUD that they're developing. They didn't say anything about this, but I think that's a cool idea. And I'm just gonna mention it to them about,
Yeah.
have you thought about adding
The
one of
casita.
these in the, you know, in one of the sections of that PUD? Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
It's not.
Yeah,
Thank
we've
you,
gone
everyone.
over time.
Yes, I'm
Fine.
sorry.
You're fine.
No, thank you
Apologize.
so much.
Thank
And do you know that the info, if you just, not that I'm not hard
No,
to
no, go
find,
ahead.
but that email comes back, so if you have a question later,
Yes,
we'll answer
please.
direct, and we'll get back through our team to make sure you get the right information.
Thank
We'll
you.
share the study with,
Absolutely.
okay, and I'll have Lauren send it.
Sure.
Thank you guys for this.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you very much. Appreciate all the questions as well.
I didn't call, it's not indicated be on the agenda, but anybody want to comment, anybody on?
No.
Okay. 10:09, meeting adjourned, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners. Nicely
Thank you.
done.